So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to share with you our long-range education facilities draft plan, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about kind of how we've gotten to this point and kind of where we're going. And we'd love your feedback because it is a draft plan, and we kind of want to hear as much as we can from the community, whether it's parents, teachers, and students. And in the next couple of days, we're going to be putting a survey out, and it's going to be on our website, the link. And I encourage you to kind of provide input on the survey as well, because we'll be using that as we kind of move forward in the process. So I'd like to introduce some of our presenters tonight. We have our high school principal, Mr. Josh Otlin. We have Kathy Perry, who's our Assistant Superintendent for Business and Finance. We have Craig Consigli, who's our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction. We also have 3 of our school committee members here this evening, Joe Marias, Jen Parson, and Joe Callery. And I believe we might have one of our long-range facilities planning members with us this evening, too, in the back. So the task of the Long-Range Education Facilities Committee was to develop a long-range education facilities plan and make recommendations for the future around building, renovation, major projects, taking into account where are we going in terms of teaching and learning, the technology infrastructure and vision, and facilities planning. So the process is, we had a long-range facilities committee that met several times, and we looked at the facilities as a whole, and we had a group called Nasdaq come out and do an evaluation of all our facilities, and they looked at the major systems in each of the buildings, the roof, the windows, and just the general state of the facilities. We have a pretty detailed plan that's also on our website if you have an interest in that, and it kind of breaks down each building in terms of what year the building was built, when was it last renovated, and what are the states? What's the state of kind of major systems as well as the structural integrity of the building? We also had the Center for Living and Working Incorporated complete an evaluation on ADA compliance, and that's another thing we were really taking into consideration as we move forward with our facilities plan, as well as just our regular projects along the way is accessibility issues. And then this is the part where we're actually sharing our findings with the stakeholders in the community. So tonight, again, we're going to look at where is teaching and learning going. We're going to talk about that Nasdaq report. We're going to talk about what our priorities are in terms of facilities and what some of those options are. And then we also want, Mr. Otlin's going to talk to you a little bit about connecting facility planning to the actual educational needs moving forward. We're going to look at a couple options again, and then we're going to open it up for questions or comments that you might have at the end. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Craig to talk about the educational piece.
Thank you. So one of the essential questions that our committee had was basically, where is education heading in the next decade? We recognize that in education over the last 30 or 40 years, actually over the last 10 years more specifically, there's been some dramatic shifts in how learning happens in a classroom. With the advent of the internet, we all know that everybody has access to the same types of information, so no longer are we necessarily relying on a teacher to stand and deliver all of the information. It's more about how can the teacher help students learn to work with the information that's at their fingertips. And again, some of the shifts that we're looking to make is we need to allow spaces for kids to collaborate. Excuse me. Like I said before, kids have all the information, teachers have the information, but how can we put kids in positions where they can take that information and apply it to new sets of problems and come up with answers to not necessarily true or false type of answers, but to real life situations. And we also recognize that the workforce and college community are looking for how are set up to have these interpersonal skills. They may be smart, they may be able to answer questions, but can they work with the people around them? Can they communicate not only through a computer, but can they speak and talk with people? So in thinking of where we're going with our long-range plan, Technology infrastructure certainly is one of the things that we need to consider. The vision that we have as a school department is we want to create classrooms that are as dynamic as the world around us. And that means that all of the classrooms need to be reliable, and the systems that they have in place, when a teacher wants to use something on the internet, they're going to be able to trust that it'll come up. Or if they have this, any kind of a classroom presentation set up, it's ready to go. So we need to make sure that all those are in place. And obviously, the buildings that we have other than Woodland were never set up to handle the kind of infrastructure and the kind of changes that technology has taken. So some of the things that teachers are working on now is they're trying to help their kids, or help our kids, use what's in front of them, but not only use it for the purposes that they put, but they want to make sure that they're safe too, and they're creative. So that, in order to do that, they have to put them in those positions in the classroom, and they can't just trust that kids are going home and learning how to use all these different technologies on their own. So we need to make sure that we're putting them in those positions in school. So I thought that we thought that this slide, there's a lot of words on it, I know, but one of the pictures there, that's a picture of Woodland, and that's an alternative learning space that they have at Woodland. So that's an example of how the architecture of a school can really drive some of the instructional practices that are happening in a school. In this particular picture, for example, this is an example of a classroom that's happening at Woodland. There's some circle classrooms. So some of the classes in a different area, I think they're in their own classroom working on something, and then you have another part of the class over here. So this is an example of how using spaces can really kind of drive some of the instructional practices in the school. And then I think here's another example. These are breakout spaces at Woodland outside of the classroom. It's actually 2 different floors. So part of what goes on at Woodland is, again, there's the classroom space. That would be on the other side of this wall. But then right outside of the classroom are these collaborative learning spaces where teachers can send kids out into the hallway, and they can, well, in both of these cases, there's a teacher leading it, but not necessarily. They still have sight lines to those different spaces. I think Kathy's going to talk to you now about some of the key findings that they found on the Nasdaq report. Kathy?
So Nasdaq did looked at 2 areas for us. One being our trends in enrollment, and they actually will perform that for the district every year as part of our association fees, and we do take advantage of that. In addition to, as Kevin mentioned, Dr. McIntyre mentioned, that the assessment of the buildings. So essentially the largest takeaway was that the Nasdaq report provided the schools with the data to complete our overall plan. In addition, the projection that the Nasdaq report showed us is that they thought we would be staying stable over the next 10 years with our enrollment, and I want you to keep that in mind when we get up to the next couple slides. And they actually projected a decrease by almost 37 students. And I can honestly say in the last 14 years, enrollment was just a common 4,200 for us, give or take maybe 50 students either way, but it was really trending 4,200 for the most part of the last 14 years, and greater, I think, if you talk to other people. So the facilities report came out that each of our educational building currently falls within the planned operating capacity. So there's an amount of space that you need to have for your students to have it be acceptable, and we're all in that range with our buildings. However, there are significant system issues at both Stacey and the high school, and that came out through the evaluation of our buildings through the Nasdaq. analysis. So here's our, essentially our student population trends for Stacey and the high school. So as you can see from the trend data, both Stacey and the high school are seeing an increase in student population over the last 7 years. Although Nasdaq still projects that we will see a decrease in our operating capacity, this is an area that will need to be revisited on a constant basis and monitored to stay within capacity. So here we want you to kind of look at all of our schools in the capacity and starting the school year to current, what are we in, almost April, we're up 150 students. So right now we're at 4,371.
Let's go back one second.
Sure.
See the numbers there. This was in October, the top numbers.
And that's March. So this slide's, prepared almost 7 months later. And the trend is that it's just going up. Yep. So based on the Nasdaq report in their analysis of all of our buildings and the age, capacity, technology, everything being considered, systems. This is where the Long Range Ed Plan Committee came up with their overall priority. So the high school being of the top priority, and then we move into the Stacey Middle School, which has greater age than the high school, to Memorial, and then Brookside and Woodland. Woodland for obvious reasons. Brookside, as you all know, had a major renovation about 15 years ago. So Milford and the high school and Stacey School are our priorities.
Thanks. So I want to tell you a little bit about, first of all, like why Milford High School is the top priority district-wide, and then try to explain a little bit more fully as to what we see as the needs at Milford High School in particular. So we have facilities issues here. The building was constructed in 1971. While our preschool classrooms were renovated in 2004, all of our other classroom space is original. Craig spoke earlier in the presentation about our hope to have all of our classroom facilities really aligned to 21st century learning needs. And as a building that was constructed in 1971, it's sort of not up to spec for contemporary high schools that you're going to find in Massachusetts. We have serious systems issues. They kind of run the gamut from plumbing to our HVAC to electrical. Just keeping the building systems operating at a pretty minimal level requires a tremendous amount of effort and resources on an annual basis, and those costs are just going to increase over time as the building gets older and older. We have a major roof project that's going to be required in approximately 5 years. And all of our doors and our windows and our flooring all require some degree of replacement. So, our facility staff does a wonderful job doing the best they can to take care of our facility, but the truth of the matter is it's an old facility in need of a lot of updates. I think equally importantly is while we have major facilities issues, educationally the building's not able to meet what I see as both our current needs and our projected needs in the future. For me as the principal, the whole name of the game is to improve what happens to our students after they graduate from high school. Right? And the way that we measure their success after high school is if they go to college, do they complete college? And what happens when they get into the workforce? What kind of jobs are they able to secure? Are they able to support themselves independently? Are they able to find work that they find rewarding? And so we need to look at improving our long-term outcomes for students, both in terms of college and career. And to do that, we're not going to get different outcomes with the same programming that we have and that we've had historically. So to generate better outcomes, I think we're going to need new programs. And I'll talk tonight about what we believe we need a sort of a strategic mix of both academic and vocational programs to help our students take advantage of the opportunities both in the labor market today and projected opportunities in the labor market in the future. And I think most importantly for me in terms of our limitations right now is the facility in its current state really creates some obstacles that we cannot clear with regards to program development. And this is particularly with regards to our science labs and our labs for technical education. And I'll speak more about why I believe that we need upgrades to both our science lab and our technical lab space. So when I talk about improving college and career outcomes, it's helpful to get some baseline as to sort of where we're at. So I ask you to start off by taking a look at this chart over here on your left. And so These are students who graduated in the classes of 2013 to 2017, and this is showing their college enrollment data. So blue represents the percentage of students enrolling in a 2-year college. So these are community colleges or junior colleges. Gray shows the percentage of students that are enrolling in 4-year colleges. And then the orange line at the top is showing the total percentage of graduates who are enrolling in college in the fall after graduation. So I think what I really want to draw your attention to is the orange line. The orange line is ranging in between about 74 and 76% of students in these 5 graduating classes enrolled in college the fall after high school. That means 1 out of every 4 graduates was in the labor market the fall after high school, right? 1 out of every 4 graduates is in the labor market within months after graduation. And so I think that's I think that creates a really enormous responsibility for us as educators to ensure that for a full quarter of our student population that we're providing them with educational opportunities that allow them to enter the labor market after graduation and do well for themselves. It's equally important to note that here in Milford, just like across the Commonwealth and just like across the country, we also have substantial numbers of students who go to college but don't complete college. And I think we need to keep those students in mind when thinking about our programmatic offerings. So what you see in this chart on the right is this is following one cohort of students. This is the students who graduated Milford High School in 2010, and this is the most recent data we have from the state. So while it's a little bit old, this is the best that we have. And the way that this chart works is you'll see that there's a black line, that's Milford High School, and the gray line is the state average. And so the lines overlap most of the way through and they diverge at the end, and I'll talk more about that. So on the far left, this is looking at, it starts at 100% because this represents all the kids who started off in high school, I believe in the fall of 2006 as freshmen, who were in that class of 2010. And we see that the lines start dropping as you move to the right. So the next metric here is the percentage of students who started off in the class who ended up graduating high school within 5 years. And we see that we're at about 87, 86%, which is right on par with the state average. The next data point is the percentage of students in the cohort who enrolled in college in the fall after graduation. And now we're at about 60%. Again, we're right there at the state average. The next measure is persistent enrollment in college. Persistent actually just means if a student comes back for a second year of college. And we're starting to see a little bit of drop off there where we're having about 60% enrolled and maybe somewhere around 53 or 54% remain enrolled in school for a second year. And then when you ultimately look at degree completion, which is measured in 6 years, we're coming in above the state average, but still under 50% of the cohort. So another way of thinking about that is if you look at all of the students who were freshmen in the fall of 2006, and you move ahead 10 years later, right, more than half of those students are in the labor market without a degree beyond a high school diploma. So again, from my perspective as the principal, this speaks to a pressing need to ensure that we're providing high quality career readiness education here at Milford High School. This is the best data that we have on what's going on with our students when they graduate from high school and enter the labor market. So these are students who graduated in the class of 2015, and this is from data in 2017. And the state was able to identify 56 students in the class out of 261 who they could actually track their data in the labor market. So that's about 21% of the graduating class. So it's probably about 5 or 6% of the graduating class who's in the labor market but's not accounted for in this data. And so what we can see is that of those 56 students, this is now 2 years after high school graduation, their average earnings are $15,500 per year, right? So these are poverty wages, right? That's not enough to support yourself independently in the metro, in sort of the Metro West area of Massachusetts. And we see that the 2 areas that in which our graduates who did not have any additional education or employed at this point is retail, trade, and food services. And that stands to reason because these are both industries that employ non-skilled labor. And so for students who don't have specialized training and they don't have specialized technical skills to sell in the labor market, their only entry point into the labor market is at the bottom of the rung. And again, you know, young adults who are working in retail and who are working in food service, you know, they're earning average salaries under $14,000 a year. And so these are poverty wages. And so these are outcomes that we need to improve going forward for our students who enter the workforce directly after graduation. The good news is that both today in Massachusetts and it's projected in the future, there are actually outstanding opportunities in the labor market for students who have limited or no education beyond a high school diploma. So the trick is providing programming here at Milford High School that allows our students to tap in to those opportunities in the labor market. So this data comes from the Department of Labor. The center column shows the projected growth in demand for workers in each of these industries between 2016 and 2026. And the column on the far right shows mean wages in 2017. So at the top of the list here, supervisors of construction trades who are averaging over $81,000 a year. I'd point out here on the third row, supervisors of mechanics and installers. So these are primarily people in supervisory positions working in advanced manufacturing facilities. I'd point down to here, plumbers and pipe fitters, electricians, carpenters. These are all skilled tradesmen. And I'd also highlight computer support specialists. So we have folks who are skilled at working on both hardware and software, in networks and supporting users with nothing more than a high school or some college degree, average salary of $61,000 a year. The opportunities are even better in what we call the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, particularly for students who can go on to earn 2-year degrees. So again, the chart's laid out the same way, where the center column is projected growth, the right column is mean wages in 2017. And you'll see here that the list is primarily made up of folks who work in biomedical science, so radiation therapists, MRI technologists, medical sonographers, dental hygienists, nuclear medicine technologists, cardiovascular techs. But then I would also see that we have web developers and computer network support specialists. So many of you are probably aware that Milford Regional Hospital is the second largest employer in our community after the school department, right? We all know that there's been substantial growth in Milford Regional Hospital recently. So not only statewide is biomedical science in very high demand and projected to grow, but right here locally, we see biomedical science as being a very advantageous path to direct our students towards. And we can see here in the average salaries that these are positions that are in very high demand today, and the supply shortage is expected to increase going forward. So if we can help students access associate's degree programs, 2-year programs, right, where they can go to study, be a radiation tech or an MRI tech, they can move into a field with outstanding opportunities for earnings in a very sort of meaningful industry. So to come back to our facilities right now, if we want to try to position our students to move into the trades, if we want to try to position our students to move into careers in information technology and biomedical science, we have some real serious constraints here in the building that we need to address moving forward if we're going to change some of these outcomes. So right now, in terms of our science labs, not only are our science labs sort of out of date in that they were constructed in 1971, we simply don't have enough space. So right now in this current school year, we're teaching 2 science classes in non-lab classrooms. We hope to add another science teacher next year. If we do, that means we're probably going to be teaching somewhere between 5 to 7 science classes in non-lab classrooms. I'd rather teach a science class in a non-lab classroom than not have the science class, but our students deserve to study their science courses in science labs. We don't have adequate science lab capacity in the high school right now. We launched a new building trades program just this year for the first time, again, to try to position our students to take advantage of the opportunities in the labor market in the construction trades. We're teaching our building trades class right now in a classroom where we also teach robotics and engineering. We're making do with what we have, but it's not a proper woodshop class. And if we had a proper woodshop space, we could offer students a superior program in building trades. And we really hope to expand our programming in biomedical science, in computer science, in the building trades, and also in advanced manufacturing. But I have to stress to you that right now the building is maxed out, right? We cannot add additional programming beyond what we're already offering. Again, we're already teaching science classes in non-lab classrooms. So to add yet more classes in biomedical science when we don't have the existing lab space is really problematic. We can offer classes, but again, students will not be studying those subjects in the spaces that they deserve to study in. Same with computer science, building trades, and advanced manufacturing. I just sort of point out briefly, advanced manufacturing is the one area here where we really haven't been able to even make sort of initial steps because we're maxed out on space. So we do have some classes in biomedical science right now, some offerings in computer science, an initial offering in building trades, but advanced manufacturing we just can't even get off the ground because there just physically is no more space in the building that would be suitable to retrofit for an advanced manufacturing lab. Lastly, this gets back to what Craig was saying earlier, just in terms of sort of, the broader design considerations beyond sort of having appropriate lab space for STEM programming and career readiness programming, is that we want to have flexible spaces here that support collaboration, just like the wonderful space that you can see when you visit down in Woodland. And especially that we're going to have students coming up from Woodland who I think are going to have sort of expectations for a certain mode of instruction and a certain type of pedagogy. We want to be able to keep pace with our students' expectations and the type of education that they've been trained in the younger ages. And to do that right now in our existing building just simply isn't possible. Okay. And so at this point, one of my colleagues is going to talk to you about Stacey in some more detail.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. I don't trust you. Stacey's the second priority for very similar reasons to the high school. Again, the need for instructional spaces and other facility spaces that are designed to meet 21st century learning. When Stacey was originally designed and built, special education programming wasn't what it is today. English learner programming wasn't what it is today. So we have significantly more needs for small group spacing. And Stacey Middle School is currently meeting our needs, but it's not kind of maximizing the opportunities for students in terms of the space. The last major renovation was completed in 1994. Prior to that, 1930, and it was built in 1900, so it's over 100 years old, coming on close to 120 years old. Doors, windows, and flooring all require some degree of updating or replacement. If you've ever been to an event at Stacey, you know there's inadequate parking, whether it's an event or just daily parking, and there's significant congestion both during arrival and dismissal times. So we came up with, two potential options emerged, and one we call the complex option, and the other we call the traditional option. And the complex option is to look at the potential of developing a combined middle and high school complex, either here on the current Milford High School site or at some other suitable site in Milford. And that would be part of a feasibility process to determine that. And then following that would be a Memorial Elementary School renovation or rebuild, and then a Brookside Elementary School renovation or rebuild. And at some point down the road, well after I'm gone, we'll look at Woodland again. The traditional option is more kind of following a more traditional pathway, where we would look at a renovation or new building project for Milford High School, a renovation or new building project for Stacey Middle School, and then a Memorial renovation or rebuild, followed by a Brookside renovation or rebuild. So this wouldn't really change the administrative or academic organization. Stacey Middle School is currently organized in 3 teams for each grade level. Milford High School is currently organized by academic departments. This would not change whether we went the traditional route or we were to put both buildings on one complex and one site. It wouldn't change how we would educate. We'd probably have some opportunity if we had both buildings on the site to share, possibly like a master cafeteria and maybe some common space, but generally the programs would remain separate. One potential advantage would be maybe some of our 8th grade students could take some high school classes because, if they've maxed out in math or science or, or wherever. So some of the considerations and questions of the complex options. One of the benefits we determined was it limits the number of long-term and large-scale projects. Woodland came in at $65 million, give or take. And if we were to do Woodland today, I was talking to some architects recently, that project would be over $100 million. So the cost escalation in construction of large building projects is outpacing I think even the MSBA's ability to kind of support communities across Massachusetts in the building. We also saw it allowing for potentially maximizing resources, creating a greater connection between the high school and the middle school, reduce the number of campuses that the community is required to maintain. So questions, the cost, again, this goes back to cost. The cost of a large-scale project that addresses both the needs of Stacey and the high school facilities would be considerable. Most high school projects, when you're talking about a new building now, are you're somewhere in the range of $125 to $200 million. And that's a considerable amount of money and investment. Current MHS or other Milford location site suitability, basically we have about 1,200 students at Milford High School, about 1,000 students at the middle school. Can we put 2,200 students and faculty on the campus on any given day? Third, traffic patterns. Again, you think Stacey's congested. If you've been for high school pickup or drop off, that gets a little congested too. How would that work? What are some possibilities connected to that? And then parking for students, faculty, parents, and guests. And right now on the site, there's plenty of parking, but if we were to add a building or change the footprint, how's that going to impact not only the parking, but also kind of the traffic flow of the site or a different site? So the general timeline is we'd love to kind of get the projects underway sometime between 2023 and 2025 for a number of reasons, and then follow that up every 7 to 10 years. When we look at Memorial, Brookside, and Woodland, we put in 243 to 248, but it's difficult to tell. You're projecting out almost 25 years. So traditional traditional option considerations. The projects become more manageable from a fiscal perspective, and they're potentially addressed over a longer period of time. One of the biggest concerns we have about the Stacey project in particular is student location during a renovation or rebuild process. Stacey's very landlocked. There's not a lot of places to even put temporary classroom space there. And even renovating within the building, if you've been in, there's multiple levels, and I think it'd be difficult to manage a project while students are in the building. If you're doing a renovation, a rebuild we'd probably have to do another site somewhere in town if we were to look at a rebuild for Stacey. Cost of 2 separate projects could be more expensive depending on scope. If we're going to do kind of like if we look at a complex process where if you did some kind of combination of a renovation and a new construction, could that be less expensive in the long run than 2 separate projects, whether they're renovations or new buildings? And then location options if Stacey Middle School is a new building, like where would we put that? I know just a few years ago we went through that process with Woodland. There wasn't a lot of suitable sites in town, so I don't anticipate us finding a lot of suitable sites in town either for a new high school, a new complex, or a new middle school. So we've got to kind of take that into consideration. And there's not a lot of places to go, as particularly with Stacey, which is my bigger concern than the high school, because we've got some flexibility on the site, similar to what we had at Woodland, where we could, if we're going to do a new project or some kind of renovation, there's some space behind. There's just some space on the grounds. And in a similar timeline, sometimes starting in the next 3 to 5 years, and then kind of following that same more or less pattern with again Stacey being the second project, followed by Memorial and followed by Brookside. And the reason I put renovation or rebuild is one of the questions you ask when you go through a feasibility study with the MSBA is you don't necessarily, even if you have something in your head, and everybody might have some vision in their head of like they want a new high school or a renovated high school, we go through the feasibility study to kind of answer those questions because they really look at the feasibility of renovating a building and the cost of that versus building a new building and the cost of that. And that's one of the questions that would get answered as part of that process. So the current grade configuration right now is we have K to 2, we have Brookside and Memorial, we have Woodland, which is 3 to 5, Stacey Middle School 6 to 8, and we have the combination of Milford High School 9 to 12, as well as the Shining Star Preschool on this campus. And the Shining Star Preschool has about 160 to 170 students, give or take. But those students don't go full day. There's different sessions, so you could have anywhere from 75 to probably 115 students on the campus at any one time. So this wouldn't actually, regardless of which way we went, it wouldn't dramatically change the grade configuration. The only shift really would be the middle and high school and the complex proposed would be on one site. But the grade configuration per building wouldn't change. The other piece that we've talked about, whether we go traditional or the complex version, is trying to work a field house into the process. And that's something that we talk about as part of the feasibility study as well, is how could we kind of bring some kind of a field house concept to either a renovated high school, a new high school, or a renovated or new high school, middle school complex. This is really the big unknown, is early childhood programming, because there's a lot of talk, both at the state level and nationally, about universal preschool. And I think it's going to happen at some point. I just don't know if it's going to happen in 20 years, 30 years. There's still communities who are going to full-day kindergarten at this point, which a lot of, there's still a bunch of communities who are still kind of, moving in that direction. So I think universal preschool is probably a ways out, but I really have no way, and I've talked to a lot of people at the state, and folks really don't have a good sense of that. Now, the reason why that's a concern is that our typical classes are around 300, give or take. And right now we have about half of that in our preschool here at the high school. And so if we were to double that, that would throw a monkey wrench into either one of these plans. My best guess is we're talking 15 to 20 years out before it becomes a reality. Because again, I think every community in the Commonwealth, I don't want to say every community, but most communities don't have the building capacity to take on whether it's 300 4-year-olds or 600 3- and 4-year-olds, and adding them to the mix. But it's something we're kind of looking at and considering, and I'm not quite sure. And we've had just a couple folks kind of take a look at it, and there's a possibility that if we were to do the complex version, we might down the line be able to shift, Memorial on a new project into like an early childhood center. But again, I think that's just pure speculation. But I just want to say it's something we're considering. We just don't have a solid, like, they're not saying by 2030 or 2040 there's going to be universal preschool. It may never happen, but I think the momentum is picking up. But it takes a long time for these things to really take hold. So we've got a couple goals for the completion of the 18-19 school year. And really one of the goals is, after receiving feedback from stakeholders, we want to finalize the plan and say this is the direction we want to go in as a community. 2, we also want to visit buildings, and a number of communities have chosen to do either complexes within the same, on the same kind of campus, connected complexes, or maybe bringing like 7th or 8th grade over. We want to look at those facilities just to see, just to get a feel for them, and really ask questions of, administrators, teachers, students, and parents in those communities to try to get a sense, like, what do they like about these projects, and what did they not like about the projects. And then this kind of gives you a sense of, MSBA is the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and they supported the building of the Woodland School. And what they do is they reimburse at a particular percentage based on a formula. It's typically a little higher than 50%. So the Woodland project came in, do you remember the percentage, Craig? Or maybe Kathy, I don't know if you remember. 59%, okay. So it came in at 59%. So the state kicked in 59%, locally we paid 41%. And the formula is based on a number of factors. You get points for being green, and there's a lot of different kind of things that play into it. So we'd probably be somewhere in that 50 percentile range. One of the concerns at the state level is that, again, the cost of projects are escalating. The pie that the MSBA has to give to communities is not escalating at that same rate. So the number of projects they're able to fund, I think, is being impacted by that. So I want to open it up for questions on any aspect of this at this point, or any feedback you'd like to give. But those are kind of the two pieces we're kind of looking at, or the 2 potential pathways we're looking at, and that would be part of a feasibility study a little bit down the road.
When you're talking about a shared complex, are you talking about sharing the band facilities, the gyms, the sports facilities?
Okay.
Well,
You got that right. So I would see the buildings as kind of 2 separate buildings, but there might be some shared space. Like I could see, like I don't see, like middle schools tend not to have for projects right now an auditorium built in as part of like a new construction. So we might share the auditorium. There might be a centralized shared cafeteria space, but I don't see the students really interacting and sharing space on a regular basis. I really see like a middle school and a high school as basically 2 separate programs sharing the same campus. I think there's some opportunity to kind of share some resources, but I think the experiences are going to be, there's going to be a middle school experience and there's going to be a high school experience.
is that the current thought, that they want this complex, or they want?
We're actually looking for feedback right now, and I think one of the key things to kind of answer your question is, if one of the questions we want to answer during the feasibility study is it possible to have a complex on the current Milford High School site or another site? If it's not feasible to have that happen, then that would just take that off the table altogether.
As an abutting neighbor, I think the traffic is already enough.
Okay, great.
Another question, Kevin, could you talk a little more clarification on the pool in terms of, there shouldn't be the sole factor, but just kind of where that potentially could fall?
Yeah, so not a lot of high schools have swimming pools. And we're in a unique and kind of fantastic situation at Milford that we have a great pool facility, and they use the pool for kind of sectional, regional, state meets. So it's unclear what kind of reimbursement we'd get if we were to kind of, like, let's say we did a new building at Milford High School. We'd have to make a strong argument that we're using the pool for educational purposes and not just athletics to get kind of maybe that full 59% reimbursement rate. So that might be a factor in saying, you know, a possibility could be, hey, let's keep the auditorium and the pool and maybe some part of the gym and kind of, you know, build kind of around that as a possibility. Yep.
So if you're looking to renovate the building, what are you going to do with the students that are here? I mean, you were worried about Stacey
Yep.
on a renovation. You got a lot more students here at the high school.
So yeah, so a renovation here at the high school would be a little easier to manage than Stacey for a couple reasons. One is we could build, you know, potentially some temporary classrooms. The other thing is when you do a renovation, there's a lot of new construction connected to that renovation. So we would maybe build like a wing or two and then kind of renovate over and kind of shift the students as we kind of rebuild as a possibility here because we're not landlocked like we are at Stacey. And the other option would be if you went from a new building, you kind of do what we did similarly at Woodland, where you know, the building would be behind it or to the side or, you know, wherever the kind of it fit on the site. But I think there's a few options that would work from a renovation perspective where, again, it's not ideal and it kind of draws the construction process out a little bit, but you'd be able to move students around the facility potentially and renovate at the same time. So you'd close off like a third of the building or half the building, work that off because you've already built like a new wing or two.
This building was built for an addition.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we came in.
You could put a huge addition on from the catwalk,
Yep.
in that courtyard, all the way to the A wing, down to the D wing.
Yeah, and that would be a possibility. Like and I would say like that's a great example. Like if we were to do a renovation, you might do that new wing, shift students over, close off a section of the building, kind of renovate that. The one challenge is, you know, we'd have to like the high school is our central cafeteria for the district. And so the great news is Woodland could serve as that central cafeteria if we needed to shift. Like say we had to close down the cafeteria area during the renovation, we could shift those services down to Woodland because they have that capacity. So yeah, it's a great point. Other questions or comments too?
Are there any potential sites that you've been looking at that we could have a complex?
Do you remember the sites you looked at for Woodland, Craig?
One was on Dilla Street, but obviously the traffic was too much. We didn't want to deal with that. The other one was up near Field Pond, up that way. There was some space over there for a number of different reasons. One being an increase in busing, for example. It wasn't feasible over there. And then there was some land over off of 109 behind one of the shopping marts over there. I can't remember which one. But again, traffic over there is just wouldn't work. So those are the three that I think that we talked about.
I just have a question. So obviously we're 5 to 7 years out before even starting construction and having kids that are going to be in Stacey or in the high school, particularly having a child going from Woodland to Stacey, which I think, as Craig mentioned, is definitely going to be a big adjustment. So do you have thoughts for plans in the interim while you're trying to figure out what you're doing in order to help maybe make some of the spaces a little better for?
So yeah, we've been doing some like renovations, and we do projects on a regular basis. We have a kind of facilities kind of project plan where we're doing like kind of regular upgrades, but to do kind of like let me give you a great example. Like your child's at Woodland right now. When Woodland was built, we look at these great spaces in the hallways, and I think I was talking to Craig walking through like a couple of days before it opened, and I said, what if we just don't use them? And what ended up happening is, you know, kids are using those spaces almost every single day. You know, they're doing projects, they're splitting up. You know, they're going into the little like the circular rooms to do reading and things like that. it's been beyond my wildest imagination. Like, it's awesome the use the teachers are making of the spaces and how they're kind of providing engaging kind of experiences for students. One of the tricks with like a Stacey or even the high school is, like, the high school is a complete concrete building. So there's not a whole lot of like we'd have to do some major like structural things to make some real shifts. And at Stacey, if you've ever there's just not a lot of space to kind of navigate or move. Like the hallways, like here we could actually put out some like project spaces in this central hallway because we've got the space to do that. But Stacey, it's very difficult to kind of make any moves. And we've actually over the last few years had to develop a lot of different spaces for some specialized instruction that we really just don't have a lot of flexibility there to kind of do things from like a renovation perspective that would be significant. Just to be perfectly honest with you, it just wouldn't be cost effective. It's a horrible answer, but it's the truth. Right here?
Is there some ability to do, I mean, one of the things you talked about were the labs in here.
Yep.
Is there some ability to do some upgrades to the labs in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so we've talked about that, and we're actually in conversation with the finance committee about basically doing some purchasing that would fall under what's called the FFF&E, which is the furnishings, and it stands for 2 or 3 other things, but it's basically like some durable goods. So there's a lot of we've got a few proposals put together based on kind of scientific area, for lack of a better term, where we'd buy some kind of state-of-the-art equipment that could be shifted into the new building or maybe repurposed to the middle school, or used if we were even to do whether it's a renovation or a rebuild. So that is in the works in the interim. Question? And then we'll go back there next.
So one of the concerns I've heard recently is that if we do move to a new complex site, that the town is going to be left in a similar situation with Stacey and the current high school as it was with Middle School East, where it's just a big empty building with nothing to do with it. Do you have any sort of sense what would become of these current buildings if we do move to a complex?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we could look at some of the options we did for Middle School East that just didn't come to fruition, or it's something like we could possibly. I think it's too early to say definitively, but I think there's some possibility for office space, maybe doing, it's a lousy place for a preschool, because it's just not designed for that. I think that's one of the big concerns. And I don't have a great answer for you right now, but I would say that there's some possibilities in terms of, we're making more connections with colleges where we could bring some of that kind of programming in, potentially office space, potentially like a family resource center, and some of the community organizations that we partner with in town could potentially go, into the Stacey Middle School space, possibly. But again, I think we're going to be having kind of similar conversations that we did with East, to be perfectly frank with you. Yep. And right here?
Well, he actually asked what I was going to ask.
All right.
I would just add to that the Stacey location is actually, if I recall, 2 separate historical buildings that were fused into one. So I think even more so the Middle East, it's important for us to consider keeping that as a part of the town and the town's history. So, instead of selling it, per se, like we did in Middle East, maybe we lease it or something like that, so that it's still within, the town's control and purview as a historical landmark.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all that's on the table. I think it's premature to kind of, but it's a great question though, by both of you. Anything else? And even comments, like just your reaction to it. I'd love to hear, some of that as well. Sure. I'm gonna give you the.
It's relative to the Stacey school comment and the constraints that the school administration is having. One of my greatest takeaways from the Nasdaq report was the fact that this complex here, the high school, is servicing about 1,200 kids, and it's 360 square feet. Sorry, 360,000 square feet. And Stacey is serving about 100 less students, and it's half the size. So the space is just not available there. We literally are using every piece of space that we can at the Stacey school. Just to give you a little feedback.
Just as an aside, I went through the Stacey renovation and the rebuild. So, the class of 2000, the class of 2001 went through the process of being at 5 different locations around the town, during those years. And as far as I can tell, we survived. I think. So, I think it's something that, I think we could pull off, whether it's a renovation, whether it's building new complexes, whatever it is. I don't think this is such a daunting task for the town to get done. And we've essentially done it before. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not disagreeing with anything you said.
So in terms of outreach, I know you said you're going to be putting together a survey and putting it on the website. Are you going to be pushing that out in any way through email?
We're gonna try to use. It's interesting because we had a 0 turnout for our first 2 presentations, and so this is phenomenal tonight. So I think we're going to maybe use the reverse 911 again. That seemed to be pretty effective to kind of get that messaging out there. And then, Milford Daily News has given us some nice coverage about this particular forum tonight, and we'll have maybe ask them to kind of maybe pull a story together and send it out relating to this process. Yep. Other comments or questions? Joanna, go ahead. Joanna, I'm going to give you the mic too.
As a former teacher at Stacey and a teacher at Woodland, and wonderful teachers that are here, a new space would be wonderful, but your students can be educated in anything with good instruction. So I just want to leave that all your students will do great in Milford, and new building would be wonderful, but once again, instruction.
That's a great point. Great point. All right, anybody else want to share anything? We'll be around for a little bit afterwards if you want to just share your thoughts or give us comments or feedback. And you can always email me. I welcome emails. So please, and please fill out the survey. It's going to go out in the next day or probably by Wednesday or Thursday of this week, okay? So thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you for being such a great audience, and have a great night.